Hi folks, welcome to another episode of Trek Actually's Disappointing Younger Sibling. It's another installment of Not Actually Trek Actually, and in this video we are going to review the second half of Star Trek Discovery's second season. A couple of months ago I did a review video of the first 7 episodes of Season 2 of Discovery, and now that the season is complete and all the episodes have been released and I've had a couple of weeks to think about it, I am going to review the second half of the season, the last 7 episodes of Season 2, and we'll do this just like we did the first time. We'll go episode by episode, and then I'll have some more overall general thoughts on how Season 2 turned out. So let's get started with episode 8 of Discovery Season 2, which is titled, If Memory Serves. It was so gratifying seeing the previously on Star Trek teaser at the beginning where they use clips from The Cage, the original pilot of Star Trek, to explicitly connect Discovery to the original Star Trek. And they even go so far as to do a match cut between Jeffrey Hunter playing Captain Pike and Anson Mount playing Captain Pike in Discovery to nail it, to drive it home for anybody who still hadn't gotten the memo that they are the same character. Now, as for the episode itself, it's mainly concerned with clearing up Spock's story up to that point and clarifying some things. This is the episode where Burnham and Spock sort of go back through some of Spock's memories and also some of Burnham's memories with the help of the Talosians on Talos 4. And we get it cleared up definitively that, as we probably all suspected to begin with, that Spock did not actually kill anybody as he was escaping, and that Spock's visions of the future and his sort of fractured personal timeline that he's been dealing with up to this point are because he mind melded with the Red Angel during one of its appearances. And that's why Spock knows that ultimately the fate of the galaxy is so dire. He tells Captain Pike, I think at the end of this episode, that if they don't do something to change the future, that all sentient life in the galaxy will be wiped out. And he knows that because he had a mind meld with the Red Angel during one of the Red Angel's appearances. This is also the episode where we learn the reason for Spock and Burnham's estrangement. And this is revealed through them going through Burnham's memories, and we see an incident from when they were kids where Burnham was trying to run away from Spock's house, from the Sarek Amanda household that she was staying at on Vulcan when she was a kid, and Spock came out to stop her or to join her, to run away with her because he wanted to go with his big sister. He didn't want her to leave him. And in order to stop him from coming with her, she calls him a weird little half-breed. And that was sort of the thing that caused Spock to pull away from her. And I remember watching the episode at the time thinking, I mean, obviously it's a very hurtful thing that Burnham said to Spock, and something that cuts particularly deep for Spock because him being half human and half Vulcan is something that we know has been used against him. And Ethan Peck and Sonequa Martin Green as Spock and Burnham do a really good job of selling the importance of that moment. But maybe I'm just a dick, maybe I'm just an asshole, maybe I'm not being empathetic enough with the characters, but I remember watching the episode and going, oh, but that's it? Not that it's not a terrible thing, because it's a really mean thing to say to somebody, but that's it? That's the dark secret that they've been building up to for the first half of the season at this point? That's the reason that Spock and Burnham are so estranged and haven't spoken to each other for years and years, because they're still sore at each other for that, or Spock is still sore at her for saying that? I don't know. It didn't quite feel like, oh wow, that's a reason why they wouldn't have spoken for so long. But then again, that happens in real life, so I can't really deduct too many points for that, because in real life there are family members and close friends who don't speak to each other for years over something like that, or even something far less serious than that. So maybe that's not a valid criticism on my part, but that was just my reaction to it. Let's move on to episode 9, the second episode of the second half of the season, which is Project Daedalus. So this is the payoff to Arium's Brainiac possession. Before we get to that payoff, though, we get a sudden rush of belated but very necessary and very appreciated characterization for Arium. We see a little bit of her backstory. We learn who she is. We learn that she is a human who has been augmented by technology, when you have a character in a film or in a TV series especially, where you haven't really learned a whole lot about them, and then all of a sudden you're learning a lot about them at the beginning of one episode, it's usually a pretty good indication that they're not going to be around very much longer, and that is the case with Arium. My biggest problem with this episode actually ties into the next episode, so let's go ahead and jump to the next episode in the season, which is titled The Red Angel. And this episode begins with Arium's funeral. And the funeral itself, I don't have a problem with. The funeral itself is very well pulled off. The acting is lovely. The writing is lovely. Several of the characters get time to give little speeches, to give little remembrances of Arium, and it's all really, really well done. But it also illustrates one of the show's flaws, and that is that it goes for these big emotional beats, these big emotional moments that it hasn't really set up properly. The reactions of the crew to Arium's death and the reactions during her funeral and afterwards are completely understandable, given that the crew has grown very close. The crew has become like a family. But we didn't really see that happening in the show. So it doesn't play as well as maybe it should have. It still plays, and it still works because the actors are so good and the writing in the episode itself is so good. But if it had been set up a little bit more so that we felt a little bit about Arium ourselves, or that we felt about Arium's relationships with the characters similarly to how the characters feel about each other, then it really, really would have worked. It really would have been just devastating and amazing drama and really, really moving and heartbreaking for us, as opposed to us watching it be heartbreaking for the characters and sort of empathizing for them instead of feeling it ourselves. Also, there is a scene in this episode that is one of my favorite scenes now from any Star Trek show I've ever seen. It is the scene between Stamets and Culber and Tilly and Giorgio in Stamets' engineering lab, in his spore drive lab, where they're working on some element of the problem. And and Giorgio, who is Giorgio from the Mirror Universe, comments that this version of Stamets is different from the Mirror Universe version of Stamets because that Stamets, her Stamets, was pansexual, and the two of them had, as she describes it, DEF CON level fun. which is funny on its own, but then it builds from there. It's a wonderful scene where it builds from there to this version of Stamets, our Stamets, saying, well, I don't know about that other guy, but in this universe and in every universe I can imagine, I'm not pansexual, I'm gay, and so is he, pointing at Culber, and that's just the way it is, so you should just accept that. And then Giorgio says something to Culber, and she calls him Poppy, and Culber says, did you just call me Poppy? And this really just, this very human reaction. And then Giorgio makes her exit, and Tilly sort of comes in and goes, what just happened? And it's just such a great scene. It's such a great scene. And those two reactions, the reaction of Culber when he goes, did you just call me Poppy? And then Tilly when she comes in at the end for the button and she's like, what just happened? Hall of Fame reactions from characters, and just such an awesome scene. Next episode is called Perpetual Infinity. This is another episode that just goes for broke emotionally. It centers on Burnham's reunion and also separation / confrontation with her mother, who turns out to be the Red Angel. And much of the episode builds up to those two characters finally getting to come face to face and talk to each other, and then builds from there again to them having to inevitably say goodbye. And both of those scenes, both of those build-ups work really, really well. Again, it leads to a great, really, really solid action scene and a powerful emotional farewell between Burnham and her mother, where once again Burnham has to do what protagonists do, and what I feel like Burnham hasn't had a chance to do as much in the season up to this point, and to make that difficult choice and to say, I'm going to let my mother go. I'm going to let go of what I want because it has to serve the greater good. Speaking of scenes like that, we get the ultimate version of that in the next episode in the season, which is Through the Valley of Shadows, and I do not mind telling you, this episode wrecked me. This episode absolutely destroyed me. Because of how the show is structured, because of how highly serialized it is, I find that I remember episodes of Discovery less distinctly than I remember particular scenes or particular moments. And Pike's encounter with the time crystal in this episode is a Star Trek moment that I will always remember. That moment punched me in the gut when I watched it, and it lingers with me even now. It was such a powerful moment. I love this version of Pike. And I know what Pike's fate is from being a Star Trek fan, from seeing the menagerie in the original series. I know that that is waiting for him. I have always known that that is waiting for him from the moment he first showed up on the show. Having Pike see it for himself adds yet another layer on top of that. Now the tragedy is even more amplified than it was before. Now Pike knows what's going to happen to him. And then just to twist the knife and also make Pike more of an admirable character than he was already, the writers give him a choice. The writers force him to make a choice. He sees his fate. And he can either take the time crystal and lock himself into that fate, or he can leave the time crystal behind and maybe have a different outcome. And in doing that, the writers tease us as well, because we don't want that to happen to Pike. We love this version of Pike. This version of Pike is awesome. He's the platonic ideal of a Starfleet captain. He's too good to be true. He's like Captain Kirk and Captain Picard blended together with the best parts of both. So the episode teases us, and for a moment there's that possibility where you think, maybe he won't. Maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe he won't take the crystal. But of course he takes the crystal. Like, how does it get any better than that? And now we come to the two-part season finale, Such Sweet Sorrow. Let's first talk about part one. Again, just going for broke emotionally. There's a really, really great, really moving scene when the Discovery crew has come back aboard and they're ready to implement their plan to fight off Section 31 and then take Discovery into the future, where Captain Pike is leaving the ship for the last time. He's going back to command the Enterprise. And the crew on the bridge of the Discovery say farewell to Captain Pike. And it's just such a great scene. And finally, how can I talk about this episode without talking about the Enterprise? This is the episode where we get our first extended look at the interior of the Enterprise. We've seen the exterior already. And I've said already that I love this version of the Enterprise. I just love it. And the interior, I love even more than the exterior. I love the redesign of the outside, but the redesign of the inside, the redesign of the bridge, particularly to adapt the classic Star Trek bridge, but bring it in line with the Discovery aesthetic. It is just brilliant. It's maybe my favorite bridge set of any Star Trek show or movie I've ever seen. It's clearly based on the original set. It's clearly based on the classic Trek look, the same colors, the same sound effects. Like, it's very, very similar, but updated and brought into line with the look of this world, with the look of the world of Discovery, with Discovery's reinterpretation of the classic Trek world. I can't gush about it enough. I love everything about the aesthetic of this series, and I especially love these little glimpses we get of the Discovery version of stuff that we saw in classic Trek. I love the uniforms that the Enterprise crew wears. I love that version of those classic color tunics. And I love this bridge. I love this Enterprise. It is just gorgeous. Now let's move on to the second half of the two-part season finale, cleverly titled Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2. The first half was setup, setup, setup. Second half is payoff, 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 and it even pays off things that I wasn't expecting to get paid off. It fulfills expectations I didn't even know I had, and it also subverts a couple of expectations in ways that are really clever and really satisfying, which is a good thing. It's always a good thing when a show can do that. And Discovery goes into the future. So we get a setup for a whole new status quo for season 3. The third season is going to basically be starting from scratch with the ship all by itself in a distant future that we have never seen in a Star Trek show before. Basically 1,000 years into the future, which is super exciting. Spock and Burnham have a nice goodbye scene before Discovery goes into the future that has some foreshadowing for Spock. Burnham sort of saying some things to Spock that kind of hint at what Spock's life to come will be, but without being too heavy-handed. candid about it. And there's a reunification here between Culber and Stamets, who have been separated since Culber came back from the mycelial network. And then in this episode, Stamets is very seriously injured and finds himself in sickbay, and Culber is taking care of him and basically saying, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm going to stay with you. I'm not going to leave you. You and me, we're family. We're going to be together. We're going to stick together on this. And it's a really, really wonderful scene and a wonderful reunion we've been waiting to see all season, or at least waiting to see since Culber was brought back. So it was really nice. And then at the very, very end, we get an epilogue taking place aboard the Enterprise with Pike and company, where Spock shaves his beard finally, puts on his uniform, and returns to duty aboard the Enterprise. And we get just a little glimpse of what the Discovery version of classic Trek, or sort of pre-classic Trek, would look like aboard the Enterprise. It's great to see Spock without the beard, even though I grew to like Spock with the beard, but it's great to see him without the beard. It's great to see him back in uniform, taking his station on the bridge, and then seeing the Enterprise warp off to whatever its next adventure is going to be. A really, really satisfying ending. And with Discovery going into the future, as I said, leaves the door wide open for season 3. And personally, I can't wait to see what they have in store for the 3rd season. It's a really, really exciting place for the show to be, and something that no Star Trek show has ever done. No Star Trek show has ever done something like this, where midway through the series, they are so radically changing the status quo, so that from one season to the next, there's really no way you can predict what is going to happen. Overall thoughts on season 2. Pacing is still a problem. Pacing was not as much of a problem in the back half of the season as I thought it was in the first half, but pacing is still a problem. The show moves at such a breakneck speed that everything seems to be happening all at once, even things which should take a little bit more time to unfold, and which maybe would benefit from unfolding over a little bit of a longer time. They would come home dramatically a little better if they weren't moving so fast all the time. The threat of control just comes out of nowhere. There were a couple episodes actually pretty much every episode in the second half of the season, after the threat of control is introduced. The first time control is mentioned in the episode, I had to have a moment where I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Because control becomes the dominant threat of the season. It becomes the thing that threatens the galaxy and that the crew has to stop. And it's not mentioned at all in the first half of the season, and it's not a pre-existing concept in Star Trek. It's something that was introduced in this show, and it's not mentioned at all until the second half of this season. And then all of a sudden, it's everything. And that's a little jarring. It feels like, wow, boy, this show became all about stopping control real quick, didn't it? Also, another little quibble, they keep trying to sell the relationship, the romance, the star-crossed lovers quality of Burnham and Ash Tyler. And I just don't buy it. It just has never gotten over with me, those two, that they're supposed to be together, that I should want them to be together, that I should feel bad that they're not together or they can't be together. They tried. I give them credit for trying. And I give the actors credit for really, really working to try and sell this part of the show and the relationship between these characters. And it just doesn't work for me. Now, there are some things about the show that certain fans have grumbled about, like, for instance, the time crystals. I've seen a lot of fans online joking about time crystals or saying that the time crystal thing is too silly. It's similar to what a lot of people were saying last season, and also a little bit still this season, about the mycelial network and the spore drive, saying like, oh, it's just too silly. And I actually don't mind the time crystals. I think time crystals would fit right in as a concept in Star Trek, the original series. I don't think they're any more far-fetched than a lot of other things in classic Star Trek that we all just accept. If we're willing to accept a gigantic talking time donut, and if we're willing to accept that you can travel backward and forward through time just by flying your ship around a star fast enough, then time crystals ought to be no big deal. Other people have also complained about Burnham being portrayed as too much of a superhero, especially at the end, and I don't mind that either. I actually felt like Burnham was getting lost a little bit in the first half, and for some of the second half as well. So I appreciated her coming back to the fore for the last few episodes and playing such an important role and being a superhero, essentially, because she is the protagonist of the show. This is her story, theoretically, so she should have a central role. She should be making the most important decisions. She should be taking the most important actions to shape the story, to drive the plot forward. And she does. And it was especially important, I think, for her to come across so strong in the final episode. Because after Discovery disappears into the future, we stop following Discovery. We don't see Discovery in the future in this episode. We won't see that until season 3. The episode ends with Pike and Spock and Number One back in the 23rd century aboard the Enterprise. So if you're going to end the season and end the show on these characters who the show is not really about, you really need to make the exit of the actual protagonist impactful. And I think they did a good job with that. Despite the pacing problems, despite the other problems that I've mentioned, the aforementioned lack of build-up to big emotional beats, the other things about the season that didn't quite work for me or didn't work as well as maybe I wish they had. Overall, I think this season works very well. I think the second season is a really, really, really strong season. I describe Discovery, especially in the second season, like a baseball team that has a lot of big bats in the lineup, but has maybe kind of a weak defense, and its pitching is adequate, good enough, but nothing special. But man, when those power hitters connect with the ball, which they usually do, that's it. The ball game is over. And in this analogy, winning the game is me liking the episode. That's the point that I'm trying to get at. And the power hitters are those big emotional scenes when it swings for the fences and goes for those big emotional moments, even though they haven't been set up as well as they should have been. When it connects, and it usually does, oh man, it works. It works so well, and it works so well that it carries everything else. It pulls everything else along, even the stuff that doesn't work as well as you might wish that it would. And I had a realization about the show late in this second half, something that I thought that I hadn't thought before, and that is that I love this show. I love it like I love Deep Space Nine, like I love Star Trek The Next Generation, and like I love classic Star Trek, TOS. And Voyager and Enterprise are fine. I'm not trying to take a piss on them, but the Star Trek that I love, that I just absolutely cannot live without, Deep Space Nine, TNG, Classic Trek, and now I would put Discovery in that category as well. I love this show. I love the look. I love its art direction. I love its cinematography and direction. This is the best directed Star Trek series ever. An average Discovery episode is better directed than a lot of the Star Trek movies. It's such a well-directed series. And I love these actors. And I love these characters. Saru and Tilly are still my favorites, but the other supporting characters get more time to shine this season than they did in the first season. Still not enough. I would still love to have more time to spend with Awoshikun and with Detmer, and would have liked to have some more time with Ariam before she was killed off. But there were more time spent with the supporting players than last season, and that was really, really appreciated. And Anson Mount as Pike was such an unexpected treat. I did not expect to like Pike as much as I like him in this season. I did not expect to love him as much as I loved him in this season. And the same thing with Ethan Peck as Spock. I was not expecting to hate this version of Spock. I am not against new actors playing established characters. I have no problem with that at all. So I wasn't expecting to hate Ethan Peck as Spock, but I was not expecting to like him as much as I wound up liking him. By the end of the series, by the end of the season, I really, really liked his Spock. I liked the arc of his Spock. I liked the evolution, the development of his relationship with Burnham. I thought that was handled really well so that they come back together and are once again close and closely bonded at the end of the season where they were estranged earlier. I thought that was handled really well. I thought Peck did a really, really good job playing this character, this very well-trodden character. How many versions of Spock have we seen at this point? And yet he comes through with a version of Spock that is interesting and entertaining in its own right. So that is quite an achievement. And the thing is, even when I didn't love an episode as much as I might have wanted to, or as much as I loved other episodes this season, I was always eager to see the next one. They always hooked me. They always had me for next week. And I always watched the new episodes as soon as they were released. There are other TV shows that I watch that I'm comfortable letting to drop for a couple days. A new episode of The Orville comes out, and I'll make sure to watch it, but I won't watch it on Hulu the next day maybe. I'll watch it a few days from now. The day I'm recording this video, I caught up on the last 2 episodes of The Orville of the season, because I had just sort of kept them. I hadn't watched them. I hadn't felt in any hurry to watch them. I like The Orville. The Orville is a good show. I thought The Orville had a good season this season too, but it wasn't something that I absolutely needed to see as soon as it came out. Discovery this season, I needed to see it. As soon as it came out, I was hooked from beginning to end. For all of its flaws, for all of the things that it does wrong, or all of the things that it does right but maybe could do better, I have to say I love this show. So really, really good season 2. Can't wait for season 3. And hey, if you want to hear me give some more specific thoughts about a couple of episodes from this season, if you haven't heard the Feminist Frequency Star Trek Discovery Recap podcast, you should definitely check that out. And specifically check out the episodes where they review the Red Angel and Through the Valley of Shadows, those 2 episodes from this season, because I'm on those episodes. Anita and Ebony were kind enough to invite me as a guest for those 2 episodes, reviewing the Red Angel and reviewing Through the Valley of Shadows, and I had such a good time. If they ever invite me on again, or ever invite me to do anything else on one of their shows, I will say yes in a heartbeat. It was a thrill and an honor to guest on those shows with Anita Sarkeesian and Ebony Adams, who could not have been funnier and kinder and more fun to work with. Had such a great time doing those shows. You can listen to them on iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts, or you can also find those episodes on the Feminist Frequency YouTube channel. You should listen to the whole series, listen to what they have to say about all the episodes, but specifically, if you haven't listened to the episodes where I was on, you might enjoy those as well, because we had such a good time. And hey, while we're talking about podcasts and while we're talking about Star Trek, don't forget that I co-host a Star Trek-themed comedy podcast called The Ensign's Log. And if you like my Star Trek stuff on my YouTube channel, please check out The Ensign's Log if you have not already. Hopefully you will enjoy that as well. Okay, that's it for my thoughts about Discovery Season 2. I hope you enjoyed it, or I hope you at least enjoyed what I had to say about it. Feel free to agree or disagree with whatever I've had to say in the comments of this, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.